Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going on a deep dive into a topic that you might not expect to be as twisty and turny as it actually is.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, the history of gay marriage in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
So get ready to go beyond those simple headlines that we've all seen and really unpack how these laws that we now have, how they actually came to be.
Right.
So we'll be looking at excerpts today from Odd Couples, a history of gay marriage in Scandinavia.
Great book.
Yeah. And I think it does a really good job of bringing to life not just this sort of legal side of this whole story, but the actual people who lived and loved.
Absolutely. And how those social norms and political battles
Right.
all kind of factored into this whole story.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that I found so fascinating preparing for this deep dive was that, Scandinavia, we think of it as being so progressive, so ahead of the curve.
Right.
But even there, the path to marriage equality was not a straight line.
No, not at all.
So to kick things off, I want to jump back in time, way back
Okay.
to 1963.
All right.
So picture this, Stockholm, Sweden.
Yeah.
A lesbian couple, Jerry and Murda,
Okay.
decide to have a wedding ceremony.
Wow.
And I'm not talking about a
Yeah.
small gathering, a commitment ceremony.
Right.
This is the real deal.
Okay.
They rented out a restaurant, a fancy restaurant, 50 guests.
Yeah.
They had a wedding gown, all the bells.
Well,
bells.
this is 1963.
1962.
This is long before any kind of legal recognition.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is really interesting.
amazing.
I mean, to think about that. At a time when homosexuality could actually land you in jail,
Oh, yeah.
this couple was like, you know what?
We're doing it.
We're doing it.
It's so brave.
So brave.
And it shows you that, even when the law is completely against you, that human desire for recognition, for celebrating your love, for making that commitment, it's so powerful.
Yeah, it really shows, that marriage as an idea, it's not just about this legal thing. It's so deeply rooted in human connection.
Yeah.
And, that need to have your connections actually acknowledged by others.
Totally. So this is way before the law catches up. But it shows you that the desire was there.
Yeah.
The need for this was there long before.
Absolutely. And I think it makes you think, when you look at this example, it makes you think about all the other couples throughout history who have had to fight for their right to even be seen as a couple.
Totally.
Interracial couples who lived together
Right.
long before common law marriage was even a thing.
Yeah.
It seems like this struggle for recognition, it always starts at the margins
Yeah.
with those who are denied the same rights as the majority.
So we've got these hidden histories, right? People finding ways to celebrate their love,
Right.
to make it official in their own communities.
Yeah.
But when did the government, when did politicians actually start talking about this officially?
Right. Well, you might be surprised to hear that some of the earliest discussions about legally recognizing same-sex relationships actually came from leftist parties.
Really?
Yeah, so these parties were often advocating for some pretty radical changes
Okay.
to marriage laws as part of their platform.
And why is that?
Well, they were often trying to dismantle the whole institution of marriage
Wow.
as part of a broader, societal revolution.
Okay.
They saw marriage as, this very traditional thing tied to, the old ways of doing things.
Got it. So it's they saw the whole institution as problematic.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're we need to blow this up and start over.
Pretty much.
Okay.
So you have examples. In 1968, the Danish Communist Party,
Okay.
they actually proposed removing the ban on male homosexual acts.
Which is huge.
Which is huge at the time.
Yeah.
But they also wanted to establish a system of registered partnership
Oh, interesting.
for same-sex couples. So they're kind of acknowledging okay, we need to remove this discriminatory law.
Yeah.
But we also need to think about how are we going to recognize same-sex relationships.
Wow. So they're thinking way ahead of their time.
Yeah. And then you have in Sweden in 1973, the Swedish Left Communist Party actually proposed to abolish marriage altogether.
Whoa.
Yeah, and replace it with this idea of registered cohabitation,
Okay.
which would be open to everyone.
So not just same-sex couples, but everyone.
Everyone, including what they called sexual deviants.
Oh.
So they were really trying to break down these categories and create something new.
So that's fascinating because it seems like this really radical approach from the left.
Right.
And it might not have led to any immediate changes,
Yeah.
but it definitely put the idea out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like forcing people to start thinking about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, even if they weren't on board with the idea of like abolishing marriage altogether, it made them think, okay, what about these other forms of recognizing relationships?
Totally.
And then there's this key moment in 1973 in Sweden where the Swedish parliament actually declares that homosexual cohabitation
Okay.
is fully acceptable.
Wow. That's pretty huge for the time.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not full legal recognition,
right.
but it's definitely a step.
It's a huge step. It
Yeah.
shows that, like, you know, within the government,
Yeah.
within the political sphere,
Mm.
there is this growing acceptance
Yeah.
of the idea of, you know, people being in same-sex relationships.
And I bet this was really useful for activists to be like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
if it's fully acceptable,
Yeah,
then why isn't it legal?
exactly.
So this kind of sets the stage
Mm-hmm.
for the battles to come.
Yeah.
And speaking of battles,
Okay.
I think we need to talk about the AIDS crisis,
Oh, yeah.
because I think that had a profound impact
It did.
on the LGBTQ plus community
Definitely.
and how the movement sort of progressed.
Absolutely.
And how the idea of marriage equality even became
Mhm.
sort of a central goal.
Right. Yeah, because it was such a complex and tragic period,
Mm.
and it had a different impact in Scandinavia
Right.
than it did in other parts of the world.
Okay.
So, for example, in the United States,
Yeah.
the AIDS crisis actually brought the LGBTQ plus community closer together.
Oh,
But in Scandinavia, it had the opposite effect.
really?
It kind of contributed to this sense of separatism.
And why is that?
Well, particularly because many lesbians felt like their issues
Yeah.
were being sidelined together.
Got it. Like their health concerns weren't being addressed.
Exactly. They felt like the focus was solely on gay men.
And so that created some tension within the community.
It did.
Wow.
And the government responses to AIDS also varied across Scandinavia.
Okay.
You know, Denmark, for example, really focused on this approach of trust and information.
Okay.
So they really tried to educate the public
Yeah.
and work with communities
Okay.
to prevent the spread of the virus.
Got it. So they took a very different approach than, say, the United States.
Very different.
Wow.
And Sweden, on the other hand, they had much stricter controls
Oh,
that some people actually saw as discriminatory.
well.
So even within Scandinavia, you have these different approaches
Yeah.
to this really, you know, scary and devastating epidemic.
Yeah.
But regardless of the specific approach that each country took, the AIDS crisis forced this more open dialogue about sexuality and same-sex relationships.
Like you can't ignore it anymore.
Right.
So it really brought the issue to the forefront
Absolutely.
of public debate.
Yeah.
And it's kind of ironic, I guess, in a way, that this terrible crisis
Mm-hmm.
actually helped to advance the cause of LGBTQ plus rights.
It did.
Really?
You know, it really forced society to confront the reality
Yeah.
of same-sex relationships and, you know, the human toll of this epidemic.
And the need for support.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a really complex
Uh-huh.
part of this whole story.
Yeah.
But definitely a turning point.
A turning point for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we've seen how attitudes are starting to shift,
Mhm.
both in society and within the LGBTQ plus community itself.
Right.
But let's see how this actually translated into real legal changes.
Yeah.
But before we get there,
Okay.
there's another layer of complexity that I think we need to address,
Okay.
which is that the fight for marriage equality,
Okay.
it wasn't universally supported,
Really?
even within the LGBTQ plus community.
I would have thought that everyone would have been on board with that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but there were a lot of people who had different opinions about it.
Okay.
And one of the main reasons
Yeah.
was this idea that marriage itself is this very traditional
Yeah.
and, potentially problematic institution,
Okay.
especially from a feminist perspective.
Okay.
Many feminists saw marriage as this patriarchal institution
Okay.
that reinforces gender roles
Right.
and inequality. So they're like, why are we fighting to be included in this?
It
The
doesn't
thing that's
again.
broken.
Yeah. Why replicate this model
Right.
that, might actually be harmful?
I totally get that.
Yeah.
So it's like, why fight so hard to be included in a system
Right.
that might be inherently flawed?
Exactly. So there's this real tension
Mm-hmm.
between wanting to be recognized
Yeah.
and wanting to create something entirely new
Totally.
that actually reflects, the values of the LGBTQ plus community.
Right. And the unique needs of same-sex couples and families.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not as simple as it might seem on the surface.
No, not at all.
There's a lot of nuance here
A lot of nuance.
and different perspectives.
Absolutely.
So how did these early discussions, even the radical ones, like how did they help to shift the conversation?
Well, I think they were really important.
Okay.
Because they forced people to start thinking differently about marriage and relationships. You know, even if they weren't fully on board with the ideas being proposed,
Yeah.
it kind of planted the seed
Right.
for change.
And it's like, it's no longer this taboo subject that we can't even talk about.
Right.
So it's opening up the door
Yeah.
for more nuanced conversation.
In this early period
Okay.
is in 1973,
Right.
when the Swedish parliament makes this really bold declaration.
Okay.
They say that homosexual cohabitation is fully acceptable to society.
Wow.
So it's not legal recognition yet,
Right.
but it's this huge symbolic victory.
Totally.
You know, it's like the government is saying, okay,
Yeah.
we see you,
We acknowledge you.
we acknowledge you,
Yeah.
and we're saying that this is okay.
And it gives activists something to point to, right?
It does.
To be like, if it's fully acceptable, then why isn't it legal?
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is a really important moment.
Definitely a turning point
Yeah.
in the history of the movement.
Okay, so stay tuned because in part 2, we're going to look at how these early discussions and like the AIDS crisis
Right.
really paved the way for some concrete legal changes.
Oh, okay. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. All right, so last time we left off talking about how attitudes towards LGBTQ plus relationships were starting to shift in Scandinavia.
Yeah, like the ground was really starting to shift.
Yeah, and this brings us to a really pivotal moment. Denmark's decision to legalize registered partnerships in 1989.
Huge moment.
I mean, they were the first country in the world to do
The
this.
first in the world.
So it was like a really bold move.
Yeah, and you know, people all over the world were
It's like,
watching.
what's Denmark going to do?
Exactly. And when
Yeah.
they passed that law, it was like a signal.
Like, hey, it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. And, you know, it's not this crazy idea.
Nope.
It can actually happen.
And I think a lot of people remember those images of Axel and Eigil Axel,
Oh, yeah?
this older couple
Yeah.
who were the first to register.
Yeah, under that new law.
And they just looked so happy.
Oh, they were so happy. And it was so powerful to
Yeah.
see these two older men
Yeah.
who had been together for decades, finally able to have their love and commitment like officially recognized.
It's like they'd seen so much change.
Right. So much change.
And so much discrimination. And to finally have that moment,
Yeah.
it's just beautiful.
And it really resonated with people around the world.
Yeah, like they became this global symbol
Yeah.
of the movement.
Yeah.
It's like, we're here, we've been here, and we're not going anywhere.
And we deserve to have our relationships recognized.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't just about Denmark.
Right.
It was like this global message.
A global message of hope.
Yeah. But even though this law was groundbreaking, it wasn't perfect.
No. Yeah.
Like, it didn't grant full marriage equality.
Right.
And it still had some limitations.
Yeah. There were some key things that were let out.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that people talk about is the issue of children.
Right, like same-sex parenthood.
Yeah, and how that was kind of deliberately downplayed in those early years.
Yeah, it was a strategic move.
Okay, so they're thinking like, we gotta get this law passed.
Right.
And if we start talking about kids, it's gonna make it even harder.
Exactly. There was this concern that if they emphasized parenthood,
Yeah.
it would alienate people.
You know, we make it more difficult
Yeah.
to get that initial law passed.
Exactly. So they focused on love
Okay.
and commitment.
Yeah.
And, you know, kind of the equality aspect.
Within the context of a couple.
Yeah, a couple, not necessarily a family.
Right, so they're like, let's get our foot in the door
Yeah.
with this.
And then we can push for more later.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting because if you look at the media coverage at the time,
Yeah.
it often focused on older childless couples
Right.
like Axel and Eigil.
Like they were the poster couple.
Yeah. And while their story is incredibly important, it doesn't reflect.
The full range
Yeah,
of LGBTQ plus lives.
exactly. And I think that's something that's important to remember.
Absolutely.
Like, the movement is not a monolith.
Right. There's so much diversity within the LGBTQ plus community.
And different people want different things
Exactly.
and have different priorities.
And, you know, different family structures.
Right, and different ideas about what equality looks like.
Exactly.
So it's really complex.
Very complex.
But back to Denmark.
Okay.
So they passed this law.
Yep.
What happens next?
Well, other Scandinavian countries are watching very closely.
Okay, they're taking notes.
They're taking notes and they're saying, okay, this is possible.
Yeah.
We can actually do this.
This is like a domino effect.
Kind of.
Yeah.
So who's next?
Well, Norway is up next.
Okay.
And they have their own, unique journey.
Okay.
But they do end up passing a registered partnership law in 1993.
All right, so just a few years after Denmark.
Just a few years.
Okay, and was their law similar to Denmark's? It was similar in many ways.
Oh, yeah.
There was one key difference.
What's that?
Norway's law allowed for stepchild adoption.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's a big step forward.
It was a huge step forward.
Because it's recognizing that families come in many forms.
Right, and that same-sex couples
Yeah.
are just as capable of raising children.
As anyone else.
Exactly.
And I think it's interesting that Norway kind of went a little bit further than Denmark.
Yeah, they were definitely pushing the boundaries.
And I wonder if that's because of the different political climate,
I think so.
or maybe the different social movements.
I think all of those things play a role.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these countries that are so similar in many ways can still have these distinct paths.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that these laws,
Yeah.
they weren't just passed in a vacuum.
Right.
They were the result of years of activism.
Of people fighting for their rights.
Exactly, and changing social norms
Yeah.
and, political debates.
Totally. So it's a really complex interplay.
Yeah, it's a tapestry of all these different factors.
Okay, so we've got Denmark, we've got Norway. What about Sweden?
Sweden.
They're always a little bit different.
They like to do things their own way.
All right, so what's their story?
Well, they also had a homo commission like Denmark,
Okay.
which was this group tasked with studying the issue of homosexuality and making recommendations.
Okay, so they're like, let's get some experts in here
Exactly.
to figure this out.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did Sweden's Homo Commission recommend?
Well, this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
They actually recommended against a separate legal framework for same-sex couples.
Really? So they're like, no registered partnerships?
Nope.
Why?
Well, their argument was that having a separate registered partnership would create a kind of B-marriage.
Oh, so they're like, it's separate but equal.
Yeah, and they thought that would actually perpetuate discrimination.
Okay, I get that.
So their solution was to say that same-sex couples should have the same rights as unmarried heterosexual couples.
So they're like, let's just get rid of marriage altogether.
Kinda, yeah.
Wow, that's a bold move.
It was very radical.
Okay, so I'm guessing this didn't exactly thrill everyone in the LGBTQ plus community?
You're right. A lot of activists were disappointed.
Yeah.
They saw it as a half measure, and they wanted full equality.
Right.
But despite that initial setback, Sweden did eventually pass a registered partnership law in 1994.
Okay, so they came around eventually.
They did, and get this, their law actually went even further than Norway's.
Really?
It granted same-sex couples the right to adopt jointly.
Wow. Okay, so they're really leading the way.
They were at the forefront of recognizing the right of same-sex couples to form families.
So it's interesting how they initially resisted this idea of a separate legal framework, but then they end up passing a law
Yeah.
that's actually more progressive,
More progressive in some ways?
than some of the other countries.
It shows how these debates can be really complex.
Yeah, and how different countries can arrive at different solutions,
Absolutely.
even when they're grappling with the same basic issues.
Right, and it's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to achieving equality.
Okay, so we've got Denmark, we've got Norway, we've got Sweden. What about Iceland?
Iceland.
The land of fire and ice.
That's right.
And very progressive social policies.
Very progressive.
Okay, so what's their story?
Well, their story is kind of intertwined
Okay.
with the country's strong feminist movement.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Iceland has this long history of feminist activism
Okay.
and the Women's List,
Yeah.
which is a feminist political party.
Right.
They played a key role
Okay.
in advocating for LGBTQ plus rights.
So it's not just seen as like a separate issue.
Right, it's all connected.
It's part of this larger fight for equality.
Exactly. And this approach really shaped the law that they eventually passed in 1996.
Okay, and what was special about Iceland's law?
Well, their registered partnership law was groundbreaking
Okay.
because it allowed for joint custody of children right from the start.
Wow. Okay, so they're not messing around.
Nope. They're like, let's just do this right.
So they're really at the forefront
At the forefront.
of recognizing the rights of same-sex couples to form families.
And they even called it confirmed partnership.
Oh, instead of registered partnership.
Yeah, to kind of avoid
Yeah.
any implication of second-class status.
It's like we're confirming your love
Exactly.
and your commitment.
And your equality.
Yeah, so it's a really powerful statement.
It is.
Okay, so we've got Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
That covers Scandinavia, right?
Well, almost.
Okay, who are we forgetting?
We can't forget about Greenland and the Faroe Islands.
Oh, right. They're part of the Kingdom of Denmark.
They're autonomous territories.
Okay.
But they have their own laws.
All right, so what's their story?
Well, Greenland adopted the Danish law on registered partnership in 1996.
Okay, so they followed suit.
Yeah, but the Faroe Islands?
Yeah.
They've actually refused to introduce it.
Wait, really, to this day?
To this day.
Wow, what's going on there?
Well, it's complicated.
Okay.
There's a strong Christian conservative lobby.
Okay, so religion plays a role?
Definitely.
Okay.
But it's also about local politics and identity.
Okay.
You know, there's this general aversion to anything seen as imposed by Denmark.
So it's like a power struggle.
Kind of, yeah.
Wow, so even in a region that's known for being so progressive, there can still be these pockets of resistance.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that progress isn't always linear.
Right. It's not just a straight line.
There are going to be bumps along the way.
Absolutely. But despite that setback in the Faroe Islands, the overall picture in Scandinavia is pretty remarkable.
It is.
I mean, we're talking about a complete transformation in just over a decade.
From criminalizing homosexuality to legally recognizing same-sex relationships.
It's incredible.
It's a testament to activism and changing social norms.
And political will.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about the laws themselves.
Right.
It's about the whole context.
The whole context and the people who made it happen.
Okay. So we've seen how these countries got to this point of having these partnership laws in place.
Yeah.
But did people actually use them?
That's a good question.
Like, did same-sex couples rush to register their partnerships?
Well, you might be surprised to learn
Okay.
that even with legal recognition, the number of registered partnerships and later same-sex marriages remained relatively low.
Really? Why is that?
Well, I think there are a few reasons.
Okay.
First of all, not everyone wants to get married, whether they're gay or straight.
Yeah.
So just because the option is there doesn't mean everyone's going to take it.
Totally.
And second, I think how we define and understand sexual orientation has evolved a lot over time.
Yeah, like what we call gay or lesbian today. It might have been different back then.
Yeah, people were still figuring things out.
So it's hard to get like precise numbers.
Exactly. The categories were more fluid.
Yeah. And there's probably a lot of stigma still.
Oh, definitely.
So people might not have felt comfortable
Right.
openly identifying as gay or lesbian.
So it's hard to say exactly how many people
Well,
were in same-sex relationships.
but even though the numbers might have been low, the impact of these laws was still significant.
Absolutely.
Because it's about having the choice.
Exactly.
It's about having the option.
And it's about sending a message
Yeah.
that these relationships are valid.
And worthy of recognition.
Exactly.
Okay, so stay tuned for part 3, where we'll delve into those 3 exceptions that we mentioned earlier.
Children, church, and citizenship.
Yeah, those are going to be some juicy topics.
I can't wait.
All right, so we've talked about how these partnership laws really spark some intense debate, even within the LGBTQ plus community itself.
Yeah, some saw it as a step towards equality, while others felt like it was too much about fitting in.
Right, and not enough about, like, challenging the system.
Exactly.
Yeah, but what about, like, the broader impact on Scandinavian society as a whole?
Right. Did these laws actually change how people viewed same-sex relationships?
Like, beyond just the legal stuff?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
And I'm guessing it's not an easy one to answer.
Definitely not. There's so many factors at play.
Yeah. Okay, so let's try to unpack it.
All right, so one of the biggest impacts was visibility.
Okay, so before these laws, same-sex relationships were often, like, hidden.
Yeah, they were in the shadows.
Right.
Stigmatized.
So people didn't talk about them.
Exactly. But legal recognition brought them out into the open.
It's like you can't ignore something
Right.
once it's officially acknowledged.
Exactly, and that's huge.
Yeah.
Because it forced society to confront its own prejudices.
So it's like a challenge to the status quo.
Yeah, it's like saying, hey, we're here.
We're queer.
Get used to it.
And we're not going away.
Exactly.
So it's a really powerful message.
And this visibility had a ripple effect.
Okay, how so?
Well, the more people saw same-sex couples
Yeah.
living their lives.
Just being normal.
Exactly. The less they saw them as other.
Right, it becomes less scary.
Yeah, it's like familiarity breeds acceptance.
Totally. And did this translate into like actual changes in public opinion?
It did. We see this in polling data.
Okay.
Support for LGBTQ plus rights steadily increased across Scandinavia.
So the laws weren't just reflecting existing attitudes.
Right.
They were actually shaping them.
Exactly. It's a reminder that laws can be really powerful tools
Yeah.
for social change.
Okay, so visibility and acceptance increased.
Mm-hmm.
But did these laws impact LGBTQ plus youth?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things that I find most heartwarming about this whole story,
Yeah.
is the impact it had on young people.
Okay.
Imagine growing up in a society that recognizes your right to love
Yeah.
and form a family.
It's like you can finally see yourself
Yeah.
represented.
It's like a symbol of hope.
Yeah.
It's like saying, hey, your relationships are valued.
Yeah.
They're protected.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
And it makes me think about like the mental health
Oh,
of
absolutely.
LGBTQ plus youth.
It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
When you don't have to grow up feeling like who you are is wrong.
Right. Like you're not broken.
Exactly.
You're not something to be fixed.
And these laws helped create a more supportive environment
Yeah.
for young people to come out,
To be themselves.
to be themselves.
And I think that's really beautiful.
It's one of the most positive outcomes of this whole movement.
Okay. So we've talked about how these laws impacted couples,
Mm-hmm.
how they impacted young people.
Right.
But let's dive into those three exceptions.
All right, let's do it.
Children,
Yeah.
church,
Mm-hmm.
and citizenship.
Those three areas became like the next battlegrounds
Okay.
for the movement.
So these were the things that were initially
Right.
setting registered partnerships apart.
Yeah, they were like the limitations
Right.
built into the system.
So let's start with children.
Okay.
What were the initial restrictions?
Well, the early partnership laws explicitly excluded same-sex couples from adopting.
All right. So right off the bat.
Yeah, it was a major issue
Yeah.
because many people wanted to form families.
Right. And they were being denied that, right?
Exactly. And this is where we see that tension again
Okay.
between assimilation and liberation.
Right. So some people are like, let's just get our foot in the door
Yeah.
with these partnership laws.
And then we'll fight for adoption rights later.
Okay. And others are like, no, we need full equality now.
Exactly. And this debate played out in different ways
Mm-hmm.
across Scandinavia.
Okay.
But ultimately, the desire for family
Yeah.
was too strong.
It's a powerful force.
It is. And social attitudes were shifting, too.
Yeah.
Remember that lesbian baby boom we talked about?
Right. More and more lesbian couples were having children,
Exactly.
and their visibility really challenged the idea that same-sex couples couldn't be parents.
Right. It's like you can't deny the reality
Yeah.
of these families.
So did same-sex couples eventually gain the right to adopt?
They did, but it happened in stages.
Okay. How? So,
Well, the first step was allowing stepchild adoption.
okay. So one partner could adopt the biological child
Yeah.
of their
It
partner.
was about providing legal security
Yeah.
for families that already existed.
Right. It's hard to argue with a law that's protecting children.
Exactly.
And once stepchild adoption was in place,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of opened the door for joint adoption.
Right, where both partners could adopt together.
Okay. And was there still resistance to that?
Oh, yeah, there was a lot of pushback
Okay.
from conservative groups
Of course.
using
Right.
those same tired arguments.
Like kids need a mom and a dad.
Exactly, but those arguments didn't hold sway.
Okay.
Public opinion was shifting,
Yeah.
and the courts recognized that families come in many forms.
And then what matters most
Yeah.
is the love and care that's provided to a child.
That's what's important.
Okay, so that's adoption.
Yeah.
What about assisted reproductive technologies?
Right, so that was another big issue.
Yeah.
Lesbian couples and single women faced a lot of barriers.
Really? Why?
Well, there were concerns about the ethics
Oh, okay.
of using technology to help same-sex couples conceive.
So it's like this moral panic
Yeah,
about like messing with nature.
exactly. And there were also fears that it would undermine traditional family structures.
Right, like the slippery slope argument.
Exactly.
But eventually access to these technologies was granted.
It was, but it took time
Yeah.
and advocacy.
So it wasn't just handed to them?
No, they had to fight for it.
Okay. And was it the same in all the Scandinavian countries?
It was eventually, but it's kind of ironic
Okay.
that Denmark,
Yeah.
the first to legalize registered partnerships,
Right.
was actually the last to lift the ban.
Really, what was the holdup there?
Well, there was a strong opposition
Okay,
from the
fair.
Christian People's Party.
Okay, so religion played a role.
Yeah. They held a lot of political power at the time.
Wow. So even in a country that's considered so progressive, religious beliefs could still influence policy.
It's a reminder that the separation of church and state
Right.
can be really tricky.
Especially when it comes to issues like this.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered children.
Yep.
Now, what about the second exception, church?
Yes, the church.
So in Scandinavia, the state and the church are pretty closely intertwined.
They are.
But even with registered partnerships being legal,
Yeah.
same-sex couples couldn't actually get married in a church,
Not initially.
right? And for some people, that was a big deal.
Yeah, especially those who valued a religious marriage. It was like a reminder that legal recognition didn't necessarily equal full acceptance.
Right, like spiritual equality.
Exactly.
So did the church eventually come around?
It did, but not without a lot of debate
Okay,
and controversy.
I can imagine.
Yeah, the Lutheran Church in Scandinavia has different branches, and they each approach this in their own way.
So some were more accepting than others.
Yeah, and this tension still exists today.
Really?
Yeah, we see religious freedom being invoked by those who oppose LGBTQ plus rights.
So it's like this ongoing battle
It is.
between like religious beliefs and LGBTQ plus equality.
And it's a reminder that the separation of church and state
Yeah.
is an ongoing and complex issue.
Okay, we've talked about children, we've talked about church. Now let's tackle the last exception, citizenship.
All right, citizenship.
So how did that play into these early partnership laws?
Well, Denmark and Norway, in their initial partnership laws,
Yeah.
included a residency requirement.
Wait, really? So you had to be a citizen
Yeah,
or resident to register your partnership?
that's right.
So even these progressive countries had a bit of xenophobia mixed in.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture,
No, it's not.
but it was a reality.
And why was that?
Well, there was this fear that Scandinavia would become a gay marriage haven.
Oh, so they're worried about people coming from other countries to get married.
Yeah, where same-sex relationships were still illegal.
That's wild.
It is.
It's like they wanted to be progressive,
Yeah,
but only up to a point.
only for their own citizens.
Wow. So it's like this weird mix of progressivism and exclusion.
It's a reminder that even movements for social justice
Yeah.
can be influenced by the prejudices of the time.
Right. We're all products of our environment.
Exactly.
Okay. So did these residency requirements eventually go away?
They did. Activists argued that love knows no borders.
Right. And they're right.
And those arguments won out.
Okay.
The residency requirements were removed.
So same-sex couples from all over the world
Yeah,
could have their relationships legally recognized in Scandinavia.
that's right.
This is a victory for love
It is.
and equality.
Or globalization.
Okay, so we've seen the journey of these laws from their limitations to their expansion. But what about the bigger picture?
Yeah.
What lasting impact did these partnership laws have on Scandinavian society?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to remember
Yeah.
that these laws were transformative,
Mm-hmm.
but their effects went beyond just legal recognition.
Okay, so let's unpack that.
All right.
What were some of the less obvious effects of these laws?
Well, one of the most interesting things is that they actually spark debate
Okay.
within the LGBTQ plus community itself.
Really?
Yeah, some people argued that the focus on marriage equality
Yeah.
had come at the expense of other goals.
So instead of challenging the existing system,
Right.
they were trying to fit into it.
Exactly. And there was this concern that the movement had become too focused on respectability.
Okay, so like fitting into the mainstream.
Yeah, and potentially leaving behind
Mm-hmm.
those who didn't fit the traditional mold.
Right, so it's like this tension between assimilation and liberation.
Exactly. And it's a tension that continues to this day.
Yeah, it's like, do you work within the system
Right.
or do you try to dismantle it completely?
And it's a tough question.
Yeah, and it's made even more complicated
Mhm.
by the fact that marriage equality,
Right.
well, a huge victory,
Yeah.
didn't solve every problem.
No, it didn't erase prejudice or
Right.
guarantee social acceptance.
So you can have legal equality,
Mm-hmm.
but still face discrimination
Absolutely.
in your daily life.
And that's reality
Yeah.
for many LGBTQ plus people.
So it's like these laws were a significant step forward,
Yeah,
but they weren't a magic solution.
exactly. They were more like a catalyst for change, opening up new possibilities and sparking conversations.
That continue to this day.
Absolutely.
So where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, now that marriage equality is largely achieved in Scandinavia.
What are the new frontiers?
What's next for the LGBTQ plus rights movement?
Well, I think one of the key challenges is going to be finding that balance between assimilation and advocating for broader social change.
Right, and we've seen that tension throughout our conversation.
Absolutely.
It's like the desire to be recognized and included within existing structures.
But also the urge to challenge those structures and create something new.
It's about finding that sweet spot between integration and disruption.
I love that.
And I think that's going to be crucial for the next chapter of the LGBTQ plus rights movement.
Not just in Scandinavia, but globally.
Absolutely.
It's a conversation that's happening everywhere.
It is.
Like, how do we fight for equality while also celebrating our differences?
Our unique perspectives, our lived experience.
And how do we make sure that no one gets left behind in the pursuit of progress?
These are tough questions.
They are.
But important ones.
So how do we find the answers?
Well, I think it starts with dialogue, with activism, and with a willingness to challenge the status quo, to keep pushing the boundaries.
Exactly.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Even when it's hard.
The fight for equality is a marathon.
It is.
Not a sprint.
And it requires all of us to keep showing up.
To keep fighting.
To keep believing in a better future.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
We hope you learned something new.
I know I did.
And that it sparked some thought-provoking conversations.
Absolutely.
We'll catch you next time for another exploration.
Sounds good.
Of a topic that's way more complicated
I love those.
than you might think.